Hello, and thank you for joining. This is Rob Erzin from Arthur Gallagher and Company. We're here to talk about how to properly insure your practice. And today we're going to be focusing on errors and omissions insurance and cyber liability. Now, many of you who are watching this have been purchasing errors and omissions insurance for a very, very long period of time. It's the main source of your liability insurance, and our claim experience bears that out. It's about 95% of the total losses relate to errors and omissions type claims as opposed to general liability or other types of potential claims. So E&O is your largest source of liability, and most all of you are buying a good E&O policy, hopefully through us. But cyber liability is an emerging area of risk. And 10 years ago, virtually none of my BGA clients bought cyber liability insurance for very good reasons, frankly. The claims that we were seeing in that time period, 2010 to 2015, were mainly targeting large companies, Target and Sony, and some of the large healthcare companies. These days, though, that's a totally different landscape. And with the advent, the development of ransomware and spear phishing, and the fact that these large companies are developing more secure IT infrastructures, they're starting to look more at small to medium-sized businesses. So I want to talk to you about how to properly insure your company against a cyber or privacy liability risk. So let's just get right into it. So here's the agenda for today. First, I want to talk about the state of litigation. It's a good baseline to figure out where exactly are we getting claims from and how much are we getting. We'll talk about insurance agents, general agents, and you'll see I'll be focusing a bit on registered representatives because that's a lot of where our data comes from, but it's a good baseline to understand kind of where we're at in a business cycle in terms of litigation against general agents or insurance agents or registered reps. And then we're going to talk about how to properly insure that litigation risk, mostly through errors and omissions insurance, and some best practices, especially related to documentation. And then we're going to talk about emerging risks in cyber liability. And again, I think we're going to be focusing a lot on ransomware because that is continually being the largest source of risk for our BGAs. So here is a graph for Finra arbitration statistics. Those of you who don't sell securities or are not familiar with Finra, Finra is the self-regulatory organization for broker-dealers. And the reason I put this chart up, because it really is informative for where we're at in the business cycle. We've had a 10-year bull market, kind of starting, maybe actually 11-year bull market now, we're in 2021, starting in about 2009, 2010. So it's not surprising that when we saw the peak of litigation against registered reps, and there was a lot of insurance agents tied into that, was around 2009. The stock market was at near lows we hadn't seen for 15 years. The NASDAQ had fallen from 5,000 to about 1,500. So litigation had risen significantly. Well, if you look at the next 10 years, we've seen pretty much a downward trend or a flattening. And that's really where we're at today, which is really the good news. And it's not unexpected as the S&P continues to rise and incomes continue to rise, interest rates remain low. Litigation against agents, registered representatives remains pretty darn low. So that is the good news. And here's some statistics around that. Like again, new case filings in Finra are down 48% from 2009. The S&P during that same period of time is up 248%. So you can see again, people are making money. Really does, the tide does rise all boats. And we just have a decrease in litigation risk. The most severe claims for BGA really did track the Finra statistics, 2009 being our most claims reported, and 2013 was our most severe. And if you think about it, that makes some sense. It takes some period of time from the financial crisis for those losses to materialize, to finally say, I give up. Or maybe this whole financial plan didn't work. Or maybe these insurance products that you sold me were totally unsuitable and didn't foresee that we were going to be in a crisis. So 2009 and 2013 really were the largest years for E&O claims. And so what's driving those claims today? And some of the claim activity that we saw in 2009 or 10 are still coming forward today, but we got some new entrants. I would say self-insured healthcare scams have been one that we've been dealing with the last 4 or 5 years. as you've seen the cost of healthcare rise so considerably for so many businesses, everyone's just looking for a way out. And there's been some organizations that have formed claiming, for instance, that they don't have to comply with ERISA, or that, no, they don't actually have to be approved by a state government. And oh, by the way, they are backed, these organizations, by large insurance companies, but sometimes the data and information about how they're being backed is a little bit amorphous and difficult, or it's an outright lie. And we've had, and one of the modes of which these companies go out is to get as many agents selling these healthcare plans as they can. And they sell them as partially self-insured, partially fully insured by large insurance companies. And ultimately, they pay claims to start, but maybe some years down the road, as many Ponzi schemes do, they stop paying claims, run into financial difficulty, they go out of business. The perpetrators are either gone or they're being investigated, and the brokers and agents are left holding the bag. So self-insured health insurance, or organizations that purport to be new entrants into the market that offer lower healthcare premiums, less verification by the client company or their employees. When it's too good to be true, it often is. So that is an area that we've seen some of the most severe claims. Others, failing to properly supervise. Brokerage general agencies are fantastic at what they do. They teach their agents chapter and verse about how products are supposed to be sold and all the nuances. But through that process, they may get more engaged with individual customers, and oftentimes are being held to a supervisory standard. So we get a lot of those kinds of claims. And fortunately, for the most part, it's cost of defense to get the BGA out, because there's no real supervisory responsibility for an independent brokerage general agency over an agent. But I would just caution you that in the event that you do have a personal relationship with the end client, that you make sure that's well documented about what your role is with that customer and what your role is with that agent. You're there to assist, but you're not their supervisor. Also there, it's important to know who your agent is. And you don't get failure to supervise claims over good agents. You might get one or two, but very often it's over agents that aren't the greatest agents, that have product understanding difficulties. And so knowing your field force of agents and being sure you're working with the best you possibly can is very important there. Premium financing continues to drive claim activity, primarily in index universal life, mainly surrounding the fact that we have such low interest rates. And why not pitch a product where you can literally pay for your cost of insurance, transfer tens of millions of dollars of assets to your progeny and to your beneficiaries, and it's nearly free. The problem is nothing's ever totally free, and oftentimes the financing arrangements surrounding these can be complicated and can change. And if we have a rise in interest rates, that's what I'm most fearful of, is these illustrations will kind of go out the window, and we may see a huge jump in this area. Cyber and privacy liability, we'll talk a little bit about that. Those are huge on the upswing. And failure to procure coverage. Anytime you have a failure of a duty and you don't document it, if the agent is unable to procure coverage or procure something that doesn't match the needs of the customer, and then they have an event, a death, a disability, and that product fails to perform, not having that process documented properly is really important. And it's usually in those scenarios where millions of dollars are owed and they're unhappy with what they ultimately purchased or didn't purchase. That's the spot for where we're seeing claim activity. So in terms of, now we talked a little bit about litigation. It's in a very good spot right now. We're at a trough, but we still have these kind of hot spots of areas that I want you to be focused on when you go back to your businesses. But also, I think I want you to take a look at how do you properly insure that risk. And there's two primary ways that our BGA clients insure this risk. One of them is group E&O programs, and the other is buying your own E&O policy. And I'll give you some of the pluses and minuses of those and what are some of the pitfalls you should be aware of. And also I'll go into what goes into underwriting an E&O policy and what your fellow NAILBA members and other BGAs are buying. So let's talk about the professional services triad of a broker-dealer. So a broker-dealer insures itself, its registered representatives, its registered investment advisors, and also its life insurance agents. So those of you who are participating in a broker-dealer program, you're going to be registered with that broker-dealer. Perhaps you're selling variable annuities or you're wholesaling variable annuities. So the broker-dealer is interested in really protecting those individuals that are doing business for them. So the registered representatives and the registered investment advisors are very important. Life insurance, not quite as much. Not that they don't want to have this insured in their group program, but in terms of the money that the broker-dealer makes, they make that from securities distribution and not life. So life insurance is going to be included, but it's not going to be a primary area where they put a lot of focus. And so here's an important thing to think about in a group E&O program. There are a lot of really good ones out there, but it insures you individually. That is the design of that policy. So anything else around you, whether it's your company, whether it's another producing employee in your office, are they going to be covered by that policy? They have to be registered with that broker-dealer to be insured. If they're not, how are they going to be covered? Admins, does it cover admins? Does it cover people that are in your office that really make the office run and could make mistakes? Would they be covered by that group program? And also, if you have independent contractors that are part of your business that are not also registered with that broker-dealer, how are they covered? And what happens if that independent contractor who is registered with that BD has a claim and your agency is named? Well, how does a group program deal with that? And that's an important consideration, because remember, the focus of these group E&O programs is covering you. So joint venture partners, other third parties are not going to be covered by that policy. So you just want to be looking into that and ask some good questions, because I think that's at the crux of it. You just don't want to have an element of your business relationships that you have not covered by your E&O policy. Now, a group policy, like an individual BGA, those of you who buy this, is a top-down insurance policy. It starts at the BGA level, so your E&O policy is going to have the name of your BGA. And then it covers everything down. So officers, directors, employees, independent contractors, administrative employees. It could cover sub-producers in some instances. It could cover producing employees who just do insurance only, or who also do variable annuities or mutual funds with a broker-dealer. It'll cover 1099 independent contractors of your organization. And it's also bespoke. So it is geared and built specifically for your organization. And now that we have BGAs forming unique relationships together to get better buying power, you're able to customize that because it is your policy. You're also able to usually buy higher limits. So whereas a group program may be one or two, a BGA specific policy, you can buy 4 or 5 or even more. So it's a more customized policy. It is going to be more expensive generally than the group program. So for some of you, the group program may work, but you do have control of this. You are the one who is the captain of this ship. So therefore you get to figure out and determine what's covered by this policy along with your broker. So what do you want to look for? So here's a list, and I want you to kind of keep this handy, print it up and give it to somebody in your office or look at it for yourself and just kind of run through this checklist of things. And we'll go through this pretty quickly, but how do you define a claim like under the policy? Does it require it be a customer? Customer of who? Customer of the retail agent, a customer of yours? Well, what about other third parties? Are other third parties allowed to bring claim against you? What about insurance companies? Can they bring a claim against you and it be covered? So what is the definition of a claim? And when you're thinking about limits, and we're going to talk about some benchmarking, are the limits adequate for a large premium finance loss, for instance, a big premium and a big loss that could hit your organization, where a 1 million limit may not be enough, considering how litigious our society is. It just may not be enough. That's something you need to talk to your broker about. Your prior act date. When does this coverage start? How far back does the coverage start for transactions I did in the past, for which claims could come now? What is that date? These are things that are just mostly going to be on the deck page of your policy. Independent contractors, if you have any. Does it cover you as a general agent? I do have some BGA customers who buy into individual agent programs. And the trouble there is it's not covering you and your responsibilities as a general agent. And so you have different responsibilities than an individual agent. And so if you're not covered as a GA, you could have a claim that may sneak through for which is not going to be covered. First dollar inside or outside limit for defense costs. That's another thing to consider. If you want to have, if you have a $25,000 deductible, you could have first dollar, which means that the insurance company will pay your first deductible and pay all of that deductible. You may want to have that included in your policy. Any other insureds that need to be added, marketing groups, other third party, joint venture partners. Again, this is a bespoke policy. You can add different pieces that you need. Punitive damages, pretty rare. We're insurable by law, but it's insurable in about 25 states. And I will tell you, we had a ton of them when we were talking about stranger-owned life insurance and other schemes that were being perpetrated by agents, some of which were under the nose of the BGAs, but really weren't ferreted out, and they were hidden. And so, and everybody got nabbed with punitive damages. So does your policy cover punitive damages? What are you doing about employee theft? You know, employee theft wouldn't be covered by an E&O policy. You would need a fidelity bond. So, you know, make sure you're talking to your broker about how you're going to deal with these types of risks for your organization. And additional products, you know, life settlements aren't typically covered on a life agent policy. You know, Series 6 business, Series 7, RIA business, if you're in that business category, Series 6 is usually covered. 7 and RIA usually are not and need to be added. You know, are there other services that you're offering you think might are just off the beaten path enough that you think may not fall within the category of life or annuities or traditional life insurance business? So things to be thinking about. Okay, I want to talk to you about one of my most famous cases that deals with documentation. And I told you how do you bulletproof your practice. And one of the main ways that you do that is through documentation. And I like to tell this story of Carolyn Kviklis. She's notorious in my office, and I've told this story to many of my people, and they're probably tired of hearing it, but it's a great story about documentation. So let's run through it. Okay, so Carolyn was a 50-year-old widow, a homemaker, a special education teacher for 20 years. So a revered person in her community. 4 children, 2 in high school. She received proceeds from her husband's life insurance policies. Now, he died of asbestosis. So if you can believe, you have a special education teacher, you have a family ravaged by death of their father, 2 kids in high school, and the registered rep that worked with Carolyn's husband for several years before he died. So this was a trusted advisor. She claimed that she needed about $10,000 a month of income from the rest of her life. So, you know, reasonable, you know, she was getting kind of upwards towards the end of her career, and she just wanted to be sure she's saving enough for retirement, and not having her husband there, she was very concerned. Okay, well, what happened? Carolyn was placed all $1.7 million with that registered rep. The rep traded in individual equities, primarily technology and naked option contracts. Not exactly something that you'd want to put a 50-year-old widow into on a fixed income. During 1 year, that rep traded $5.5 million in securities with a turnover rate of 5, which everybody who knows securities know that looks like to be churning, and definitely is in the interest of that registered rep. So the margin balance had ranged from 20 to 40%. Within 3 years, the account had lost $1.5 million. So if you look at this case and you haven't looked at the documentation or looked at the entire picture, you would take this rep and say, these criminal charges. Certainly she needs all of her money back, right? Well, let's see. Okay, so what we have is a series of emails that we were able to get our hands on during this litigation. And I think it's important that we take a look at a few of these. So 2 months after opening the account, here's an email from Carolyn to her rep, Bob. Bob, please change my investment goals to aggressive growth. Thanks for your help, Carolyn Kviklis. Well, that's interesting to note. She's a 50-year-old widow. Not a lot of investment experience. I think I mentioned that in the earlier slide, but not someone who's really really looking to be aggressive growth. And she's trying to preserve her assets. So when she says aggressive growth, I mean, that's what she wants. It's good to make sure you have that documentation. Bob, I'll be out of the house this morning. Call me this morning about the May 5s. We discussed getting the May 5s with a profit from the Aprils. Without news out yet, I'm concerned that this increase might and price might only be a war surge. And at time, it could pull back down to 350, which would make the fives riskier since the stock might not get up to the mid fours. Well, all of a sudden you look at this and you say, wait a minute. This doesn't sound like that little teacher who had a small family, who had little investment experience. This sounds like somebody who was very experienced in options trading. Isn't that interesting? 1.5 years after opening the account. Bob, keep your eye on Raytheon today. I just heard that the government asked them to increase their Tomahawk production by 600 missiles a day. I think there's a little cash in my account. I'll wait to write a check if you can get some of those Raytheon options really cheap. But wait a minute, now she's arbitraging on government information on a Tomahawk missile for Raytheon? This sounds like someone who is very sophisticated in financial markets and options and really is gambling with her account. 2 years after opening the account. My cousin's wife was found dead this morning. I'm home now. But do the Calpine options expire tomorrow? I see it's 452. I mean, this woman just had a close family member die, and now she wants to know how the Calpine options are doing. So you look at this entire picture. Originally, you saw a registered rep who was clearly taking advantage of this customer. But now you see that she's an active trader, right? Which kind of explains this 5 turnover ratio. You start seeing about the options and about, technology and all of this stuff. It all becomes a clear picture. Why does it become clear? Because there was great documentation. And it's not always just in emails. It could be emails, it could be phone calls, it could be, other documentation that you had that are so important to keep and save. And, when you have contemporaneous conversations with clients, have a CRM system that you're able to type into that can't be modified. So you can submit that as evidence. I mean, God forbid, we don't want to have claims against us, but when customers are making claims and litigation against you, all the conversation stops and you're left with whatever documentation you have to prove that you're not liable. So very important. So here's, my magic message for bulletproofing your practice. I know some of this is pretty obvious, but really those documentation, that documentation of evidence is what, if you talk to any litigator, is the most important. And those contemporaneous conversations, those emails confirming transactions, those emails to your retail agents about product or about the service or about your relationship or about anything, it's all well documented and organized. And that is your number one defense. So look at that first and look at your customer service relationship management systems, because many of those are built not just to help you with a close relationship with a customer, they can protect you. So look at those very closely and give us a call at Gallagher. We have some recommendations if you don't already have a system that would work for you. I say don't give in here. Don't ever admit liability. I think you always want to solve a customer's issue, but if you say too much, just like in an auto accident, if you say too much, you can actually void your errors and omissions coverage in addition to potentially losing that case. So it's not that you don't want to recognize that there's a problem, but you have to step away from that and say that you're going to research it and take a look at it. Talk to your E&O carrier first and talk to your lawyer and figure out what's appropriate to say. Because you want to do that first and make sure everybody's on board with the method that we're going to go forward with this complaint. And at the end here, I say go easy on seniors. That's still people over 65 are still a third to a half of our total litigation in broker dealers and insurance companies and insurance agents, errors and omissions. It's just a very frequent area where people are buying product and selling product. Some are selling it inappropriately, God forbid, but it's also an area where it's very, very difficult to defend. People who were without their life savings, like Carolyn Kaviclis is a good example, reaching an age where she may be retiring at some point. You have an elderly person on one side of the table who's very distressed, and you have an insurance company or BGA or broker dealer on the other side of the table. There's just a higher probability that person is going to win. So just be careful on the seniors. You would anyway, but one of the things you want to be careful of and be sure that documentation is really good. Okay, well, I just talked about this a bit, but take notes, store them with a date, time, and subject. It takes out the he said, she said. Again, the music stops when that claim comes in. It captures delta mindsets over time. This is important because your client changes over time, just like we all do. Their needs change over time. Maybe they had a nice family. Maybe there was a divorce. Maybe there was a death. Maybe their financial needs have changed. That has to be documented because over time, you want to be able to go back and say, well, yeah, I would have sold them that here because of this. And that's because that documentation is there. And that's what you encourage your retail agents to do as well. 1035 exchanges, I can't tell you, churning of these 1035 still a major problem. And the evidence of why you do that just has to be very, very clear. That's for replacements. And again, we talk about many software programs that are available. Please, reach out to us and we can give you some recommendations. And we can give you recommendations to reach out to lawyers that are in this practice that may be able to tell you some more best practices. Okay, so here's some other pitfalls and exclusions in a policy you just want to write down. Things that you want to be looking out for. A B+ or better exception to the insolvency exclusion. Many of you have called me over the years and said, can I sell a product from a sub-rated company? And like our program offers B+ or better. So at the time of sale, as long as that company was B+ or better, you're not going to have an exclusion if ultimately that company goes under and doesn't pay on those policies. And that's what it's talking about here is, if you may have claims from customers because their policies are no longer because the insurance company's gone out of business. That's important. So you want to make sure you have B+ or some exception here, right? Maybe it's A-. Our policy is B+, but very important. And if you have other professional services outside the policy, property and casualty, other things that you need to insure, don't ignore them. Talk to us about them. Sometimes we can get them insured under your policy or your BGA policy. Other times we can assist you to find coverage elsewhere. High deductible stop loss and reinsurance or self-funded welfare plans. These can be difficult to get insurance for because they are becoming a source of healthcare scams. And also they're missold a lot. They're oversold to businesses that are sub 100 employees. And sometimes the financial issues that come with that are really not well understood by those customers. So be very careful. And some policies do exclude for these high deductible programs. So watch out for that. And prior acts for new employees. If somebody comes on board and maybe they're a producer, they were at another company, and you want to give them prior acts coverage, meaning that your policy would pay for something that they did while they were somewhere else. I know that sounds weird, but it really could be a good idea because that person has probably paid for E&O insurance for many, many years. They come to your organization and now they're not buying E&O anymore. And now all that time they've done business, they have a claim, wouldn't be covered. So we could get those folks named onto your policy and give them prior ask coverage if you want. We wouldn't normally, but if you want, something to think about. Okay, so we're talking about the NAILBA program for 2020. I think it's just important to see what other people are buying. And we write, and we're just so blessed to have 252 agencies, and we're just very grateful to everyone that we've been in this business now. This is my 17th year representing NAILBA and the brokerage general agency community. So thank you, everyone. We have 504 million in aggregate limits bound by Everest, who is our carrier, and they've been with us now for just about a decade. An excellent carrier, and I think they've done a great job. Now you'll see on the left there, this is the limits that have been selected. Most people choose about a $2 million limit, and most people have chosen a $2 million limit since 2015. I think that's probably represents about 95% of our total claim activity. In the brokerage business, like the broker-dealer business, is probably closer to 98%. But life business has some severity to it. So 2 million, I think, is generally adequate for a high percentage of losses. But my preference is always, I can save you money in the deductible. You can have a higher retention, and maybe you have to pay 25,000 versus 15. I can't save you if you didn't buy enough limit on the top end. You have a claim that's above, your limit. So I always err on buying more. I know that's tough to hear from an insurance agent, right? Pretty expected, but honestly, I think that's always the case because the difference in cost could be $1,000 or $2,000, but it's it's another $1 million of coverage for your livelihood. Most folks, I mean, the retentions are really your choice. Most pick something between 10 and 15,000. And then agency revenues, most of ours are small businesses, and between 0 and 5 million in gross revenues. We have some very large ones on the top end, but most of them are 0 to 5 million. And we're just happy to have everybody. 90% of agencies elected defense costs outside the limit. So in case you want that as an element, so all of those legal bills will be outside your 2 million or 3 million limit. That's an option. And those of you who want Series 6 and Series 7 coverage, we do offer that. Okay, on to cyber and privacy liability. Anybody who has any questions regarding E&O insurance, always give us a call. Myself and Susie Whitman, we're always here to help you out. So please don't hesitate. There are no dumb questions. We deal with this stuff every day. Please give us a call. But on cyber and privacy liability, I think this is the thing that people really aren't realizing. And I think maybe you are now because you've been hearing more stories about it, but small to medium-sized businesses are targets. Cyber criminals can automatically attack millions at once. I mean, 62% of all cyber attacks happen to businesses below $1 million, and 50% of those businesses report being a target of cyber attack. Can you imagine that? 50% of businesses have been reporting that they've been a subject of a cyber attack. Now, it might not be the whole company, might be an individual, might be an employee, but those numbers are really on the rise, and that's primarily because of ransomware. Ransomware is a way that they can put a piece of malware or a Trojan horse out there that can go into your systems if you click on it and take over and can shut you out of your computer systems. And it doesn't really cost them much. So it's great for those companies that want to be able to, target a business that's relatively small because it's inexpensive and they can go right at you. So, and now, like I was mentioning about Sony and Walmart and all these companies from 10 years ago, well, this is the reason why they're going after small businesses. They just have not put in the level of time and money into their security system. And small businesses can be a stepping stone to large businesses. If you remember that Walmart story, that was the HVAC company that ended up having a vulnerability in the system that allowed them to get into Walmart. So, that's always a concern. So as you can see, it's just a much different landscape. And 97% of small businesses have neglected to prioritize online security. And most of this information is from Symantec, a trusted source of information involving cyber and privacy liability. 82% of small business owners say they're not targets of attacks. I mean, so people just aren't quite realizing that this is a real issue for them. And 23% of small businesses worry a great deal about cyber and privacy risks. That means that 3/4 don't. And I think the people on this phone call do. So I'm probably talking to more people in that 75 than the 25. But this is an area of liability, like I mentioned when we started, right next to E&O. So it's starting to become that area which you really need to be concerned about. And when we talk about a data breach, people say, oh my gosh, I had my email taken over and people got into my email and did something. They either took it over and tried to find bank account information or something in some nefarious conduct. Well, understand what a data breach means. A data breach is a data security breach occurs when there is a loss or theft of or other unauthorized access to sensitive, personally identifiable information that could, not did, could result in the potential compromise of confidentiality and integrity of data. So it's not that it happened, it's that it potentially could happen. And so your data breach is not that you found the smoking gun. All this information was taken and they use it to sign up for credit cards. It's just that it could, or it could potentially. And that's the threshold for when you have to notify your customers that there's been a breach. It's a very low threshold. And looking at the BGAs as being a significant target, well, ransomware. Ransomware I talked about. The giving a invoice as part of a PDF and it gets clicked on by one of your employees, and it launches some sort of a virus, a worm. It could be any number of types of attacks into your systems that would lock your systems down. Spear phishing are very, very popular because, they like to post it up that they're actually look like a bank, and they get you to enter passwords and information that you normally wouldn't. And they're very, very precise, and they're very good. So training and employees on ransomware and spear phishing and these types of attack is incredibly important. Hacking, network breaches, those are what we see every day. That's a type of ransomware. Lost laptops, that too, not having encryption on laptops and having personal identifiable information on there. And personal identifiable information is usually like a public record, and then something that's not public. So it could be a name and address that wouldn't normally be PII, but you add that with a social security number. Yeah, it could. Or you add that with a bank, a bank number for an account. Yeah, that could be PII. And what happens then is now you've found it. Now you have to notify first your insurance company. Hope you have insurance. But if you don't, you're going to have regulatory responsibilities to notify the public that you've had an event and those people that are impacted. And I just wanted to kind of bring this up about ransomware, because again, this is the area that I'm most concerned about. And you can see on the bottom left, professional services are now close to 25% of ransomware attacks. They're just on the rise. They're just and it's really because professional services, what do you think those are? Those are going to be people like you, like registered reps, like others in a professional business. There's going to be money there. There's going to be confidential data. There's going to be HIPAA information. There's going to be there's going to be a treasure trove in the professional services side. So that's why they're targeting them so aggressively. And that number is going up every day. So here's why on ransomware, I think, when we talk about it, why it's happening. And it really is lack of dedicated IT staff resources. If you don't have somebody who is in charge of your IT, who's in charge? You as a business owner. If you don't name that person or you don't dedicate that person to that responsibility, nobody's watching it. Because that's that old story of, if everybody's watching it, no one is. So someone has to be responsible. And you have to have some guidelines for that person. What are those responsibilities? Maybe hiring a consultant to put together a plan for you. It tells you how to deal with these issues and how to deal with training and how to deal with detection and all of that. That's important stuff to prevent an attack from getting to a point where you're going to have this customer notification problem, because that's a business risk, and it's a reputational harm to our BGA clients. And they're more likely to have flat network structures. So it's just like you don't have people up reporting through layers and layers, and things don't come down from on high and make their way down through everybody. So when you have flat structures like that, there's just not a lot of people telling other people what to do, and that could lead to people not uniformly handling their husbandry within the business when it comes to cyber and privacy liability. Simplified access to control policies. Hey, maybe some good training and control policies about how do you handle different scenarios, and what do you do? What is good husbandry? What about jump drives? Can they be taken away from the office? Should you lock your laptop? Should laptops even leave? Is your phone encrypted? I mean, there's all these policies that really need to go into effect, but they have to have a czar. So we need to have somebody in charge. Again, lack of employee training that I mentioned. There's a mistaken belief that we are too small to be a target. Again, I've kind of emphasized that and pounded on that table. Don't think you're too small, because you know what? No matter how small you are, it's big to you, right? And that's the issue, is that these are your customers, these are your people, these are your employees. So it's important to you, regardless of your size. And, like I mentioned, the thieves and the bad actors are really not targeting larger companies as often as we saw. Here's just another illustration of some of the costs involved. And I'll kind of, it's 18.8 million is the largest ransom demand. We don't see that in the BGA community. The average ransom payment in is $302,000. It was $28,920 just 2 years ago. But I will tell you that ransomware is 5 figures, and very often for brokers, general agencies. And that's a number that we've seen. Typically not more than that, because then at some point you're going to pay $100,000, probably not. But, $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, depending upon your size and depending upon the kind of information you have, can happen. This is an example of what I actually never got hit by CryptoLocker, which is one of the most famous ones from a few years ago. But this is the kind of thing you see. You click on an attachment. It says invoice, or it says something that looks like it could be a document. Oftentimes it says urgent or some reason you need to do it. And this is what you see. The CryptoLocker has locked out the system, and now it's gone through your network. Just another example of ransomware. All of your important files are encrypted. In that moment, you have to purchase a private key, and and usually with Bitcoin, these are the times when you do need a coach and what to do. And that is where the insurance company can really be of help. If you have cyber insurance, you have an 800 hotline that you could contact immediately. And then they'll walk you through the next steps. They are available 24/7, and they're going to be along your side to help you in mitigating whatever has happened. And they'll be with you through the forensic side if you need it. They'll be along with you with the legal side of what you need to respond. They'll help you draft those letters to customers. And there's indemnity should you have any to pay any losses to customers, which really is not very common. It really is all of these other costs that really cause these claims to be so large, and most of them in the mid 5 figures. So here's an example of a claim that we had not too long ago, and how these things could be kind of interesting, and how you have these responsibilities that aren't always apparent directly. You have a breach of sensitive financial data of 500 customers at a registered rep's field office. An IT administrator plugged in a USB device directly into a firewall, exposing that data via HTTP and FTP. Now, what that just means is it was out there for the web. They plugged it in. It broke through the firewall. And if you had that IP address, you could literally Google it and go right into their system. And that says Google and other sites had cached that for later discovery. Significant expenses incurred in IT assistance, forensic, client notification, because they had clients that were all over the country. That means you had to deal with Texas, you had to deal with Kansas, you had to deal with all of those regulators. They want to know what you did, how you documented it, who you contacted, and how you solved that problem. And so, the total cost of this one for 500 customers was $62,000. Now we're going to talk a little bit about transferring this risk. So this is the insurance component. So, you can self-insure this exposure, which I would not recommend at all, because the price of cyber insurance relative to other liability insurance, like your E&O, is probably, it could be a third the cost, could be a fifth, could be a tenth. So the insurance is relatively inexpensive right now. And don't buy it in your general liability policy. Even if you have like an add-on, they say, hey, for another $50, you can have cyber liability. That is not a cyber liability. I call that cyber light. They don't have the same coverage that's in a standalone policy. Take the perils like cyber and E&O and these big exposures and put them on separate policies. Don't meld them together, because you end up getting kind of a jumbled mess, and it oftentimes isn't what you need. It's just not broad enough. So general liability, they often have exclusions in the policy that would limit privacy injury. It would limit copyright and trademark infringement, which cyber does cover. Property. Your property policy is going to have computer data or electronic data will be excluded. E&O, which is near and dear to my heart. I've been the E&O broker primarily for 17 years. It's really for your professional services sales. So it's just not going to have the coverage in there. It might have a throw in, but really we recommend that you do buy a separate policy. And crime, well, it might cover some types of cyber theft. Really what we wanted to, a fraud policy is designed to cover assets that were stolen from you. So it could be, somebody who goes and steals from your premises or steals from your bank account. But those crime policies are not intended to cover theft of personal identifiable information. That's why we have cyber. So don't look to add it to these policies, and don't look to these policies for your coverage. It really should be a standalone policy. So here, I'm just not going to run through all of these, but I'll hit some of the higher points. Privacy notification expenditures. That's the one you have to notify your customers. Most of our clients don't need crisis management, but they certainly need that breach response, where you call in and you get a roadmap for how you're going to solve these problems. Most of our clients don't need PR assistance and that kind of thing, but it's there and available. If you need it, you've got it. Data restoration. Well, hey, that data may have been encrypted and may not be in a format that you need it when you come back and systems are turned on. Data breach attorneys. These attorneys are invaluable for figuring out what you need to do so you do not violate the regulations in various states. It provides regulatory defense. So if you're accused of something that you violated some rules related to how you conducted your business in terms of protecting information, it'll provide you a defense, and it will pay regulatory fines and penalties. That's very important. Most policies don't pay regulatory fines and penalties. The cyber policies, for the most part, do. And that's a big element of cost. So these policies are well constructed. They're there to help you when you need it. And so I can't tell you enough how this element of insurance, I think our industry got it right. I can think of a lot of types of policies in both life and property and casualty they didn't get right. They got this right. Some things I want you to think about when you're kind of take away from this presentation, which I'm running out of time here, but governance. Who's the czar of your program? Who's in charge? And who's going to monitor that? Who's going to do a risk assessment for you to figure out what your risks are? It's probably going to need to have someone who's on the consulting side to be able to look and say, well, where are my vulnerabilities? Where are going to be your controls? And this is part of sort of that master plan that you have in place. It's a bylaws, if you will, of how you conduct your husbandry of private information. And what's your plan for incident response? Does everybody know what it is? What happens when it's on a Sunday and somebody just happens to be in the office and then it's a ransomware attack? Does everyone know what to do? What about business continuity? How are you evaluating your vendors and what are their intrusion into your organization and what do they do with your data? Do they have good husbandry? Do they have insurance? And data loss prevention. That's kind of all of this together. And again, training. Oh my gosh, modules are out there all over the place for how to deal with different types of events that can happen in your office, and you have to train on it. No matter how obvious you think it is, I'm telling you, there's someone who doesn't know that and know that piece of information that you need to train. So be thinking about these things, and that corporate governance policy should be really that appointment of the czar, the governance policy in place should be the first things that you're thinking about. Okay. And this is kind of a good thing if you want to take this and put it on a wall somewhere. This is the on the front of your corporate governance policy, but this is what you want to do. You've got an information security program that first is there, to protect, detect, respond, recover, identify. As long as you have all of those things covered, you've got a strong information security program, but you've got to have each of these spokes of the wheel covered. Analyze your practices, identify the risks, arrange a consultation. If you give us a call, one of the problems we run into with small business and consultants is, we know some of the big firms across the country. Many of those don't deal in small business. So it could be, groups that you may know locally would be better than us being a resource, but certainly give us a call. And if we know somebody in your area that could help you, we absolutely, and we have a lot of information too of how to get started. So, please don't hesitate to use us as a resource. Okay. Well, listen, I want to thank everyone here for walking down E&O and cyber liability lane with me. We appreciate your business so very much. And if you have any questions, my number there is at the bottom, and there's my email address. So please don't hesitate to give me a call, shoot me an email, and thank you again. Everybody have a wonderful day. Take care.